Everyone said the bull was just angry and dangerous, but a homeless kid, who saw its pain, proved it was actually heartbroken. What happens next will leave you speechless. The thunder cracked like a whip above Ainsworth County Fairgrounds, rattling the steel beams of the old livestock barn. Rain lashed down on the warped tin roof, the sound of it drumming overhead like an army of fists. Inside the far end of the barn, a massive black bull stood still in a corner pen reinforced with steel bars and concrete posts. His hooves shifted slightly as the storm rumbled again, his nostrils flaring with each flash of lightning. They called him Thornrake, an animal whispered about more than spoken of. A creature some believed was cursed, others thought he was just plain mean. But behind the stacked bales of damp hay, half wrapped in a tarp and curled into a ball, a boy no one saw was watching him. Beck Rowan was 13, or at least he thought he still was. He'd stopped keeping track after his father's accident. After the oil rig exploded 2 winters ago and the checks stopped coming, everything unraveled. His mother left. The landlord changed the locks. And the town, well, the town looked the other way. Beck learned quickly that survival meant moving, staying quiet, and avoiding adults. But tonight, his curiosity betrayed him. He'd never seen an animal look so still in a storm. The bull didn't pace or buck. He just stood there, eyes half-lidded, like something heavy pressed down on his back. Then Beck noticed it. Thin lines running down the bull's muzzle. Wet, but not rain. Something else. Something human. Tears? Beck whispered, his breath caught in his throat. Thornrake's ears twitched. Beck tensed and inched backward, almost slipping on the wet straw, heart pounding in his chest like a warning bell. But the bull didn't move. He only blinked. Slowly. Deep brown eyes locked on the boy with a tired softness that didn't fit the rumors. The town had its stories. About how Thornrake gored a rancher in Broad Creek. About how a vet tried to sedate him and got a shattered ribcage for his trouble. Folks called him dangerous, unpredictable, born wrong. But now, crouched behind hay bales with a shiver working its way up his spine, Beck felt none of that. He only saw sadness. That night, Beck stayed longer than he should have. Rain muffled the world outside. He shifted closer, cautiously, like approaching a sleeping dog. When he was only a few feet from the pen, he sat down and pulled his knees to his chest. The bull didn't react. Beck cleared his throat. "You don't seem angry," he said. The bull lowered its head a little, a quiet grunt leaving its wide chest. It was the kind of sound Beck recognized, not a warning, not a threat. A sigh. In the days that followed, Beck returned. Always after closing, always silent, always careful. He kept his footsteps light, weaving between tractors and grain barrels. He brought scraps from vendor trash bins, a half-eaten corn dog one night, a stale biscuit the next. Not for the bull, but for himself. Still, Thornrake watched him come and go like he was waiting. On the 4th night, Beck dared to hum an old song, a lullaby his dad used to sing when the cold seeped through the trailer walls and sleep wouldn't come. He hummed softly at first, then louder. Thornrake shifted toward him. No charge, no snort, just leaned closer. Each time Beck stayed longer, the fear left him a little more. A strange bond began to form, one neither boy nor bull fully understood. But that bond didn't go unnoticed. "Hey!" a voice barked one morning just as Beck was curling up for a quick nap before dawn. He jumped to his feet, heart hammering. A flashlight beam struck his eyes. An older man with a limp, gray-streaked beard and a janitor's uniform stared at him with narrowed eyes. His name tag read Merle. "You ain't supposed to be here, kid. Fairgrounds off limits after hours." Beck backed up, raising his hands. "I didn't take anything." I swear Merle took a step forward, adjusting his belt. "How long you been hiding out here?" "Couple days," Beck said, eyes darting to the exit. "Maybe more." Merle's gaze slid past him to Thornrake, who was, oddly, standing at the edge of the pen, unusually alert, watching them both. Merle frowned. "That bull don't usually act like that," he muttered. "He hates people." "He doesn't hate me," Beck said before he could stop himself. Merle turned his gaze back to the boy, measuring. "No beast acts like that lest something's broken deep inside." The janitor didn't call security. Instead, he grunted and walked off, leaving Beck frozen in confusion. That night, Beck risked following him. He saw Merle toss something near the hay pile, a small blanket, folded up, and a peanut butter sandwich wrapped in foil. That was the first time Beck realized he wasn't invisible anymore. But with that realization came danger. One evening, Beck overheard 2 ranch hands near the feed troughs talking about the upcoming fair showcase. "They're bringing him out for the main event this time," one of them said, tilting his hat back. "Grellman says he wants fireworks. The crowd'll love a little chaos." The name made Beck pause. Grellman. He'd heard it before. A tall man in a black overcoat with silver cufflinks, always walking with two other men in sunglasses, even at night. Grellman didn't just own livestock, he collected them. And he didn't come to Ainsworth for the fair. He came for money. Later that night, Beck crept closer to Thornrake's pen again, his thoughts buzzing like hornets. The bull rose from his lying position and met the boy's eyes. "What happened to you?" Beck asked aloud, sitting cross-legged on the cold barn floor. "Who hurt you?" The bull didn't answer, of course, but his body shifted slowly toward the back of the pen. There, barely visible under the hay, was a scorch mark across the wooden wall, like someone had branded it. Beck leaned closer. The number burned into the wall wasn't Thornrake's tag. It was someone else's. Suddenly things didn't add up. Why would a fairground bull have a second brand? Why were his files locked up in an office Beck couldn't sneak into? Why did Grellman watch the bull like a man watching a secret? The answer came the next morning. Beck, hiding behind a dumpster near the staff trailers, heard Grellman on a call. "He's still too calm. If the crowd sees him like that, we lose the story. Hype depends on fear." A pause. "Yeah, I'll make it look like an accident if I have to. People believe angry bulls, not heartbroken ones." Beck felt his blood go cold. That night, as rain returned and wind howled across the dark fairgrounds, Beck crawled back beside Thornrake's pen and whispered everything he'd heard. The bull stood quietly, not blinking. "I don't think you're bad," Beck said. "I think you lost someone, and now they're trying to make you into something else." His throat tightened, remembering his own father, his warmth, his stories, the oil rig that swallowed him up and left nothing behind. No one cared why Beck slept in barns, just like no one cared why this bull cried when no one was looking. Beck looked up at Thornrake, his face lit by moonlight spilling through a crack in the barn wall. "I'm going to help you," he said softly. "I'm going to show them all." He didn't know how yet, but something inside him had clicked into place. He no longer saw the bull as just an animal. He saw him as family. And far away, beyond the fairground lights, someone else was watching. A man in a black coat stood near a truck, a cigarette burning between his fingers. Grellman. "Keep an eye on that boy," he said to one of his men. "I don't trust animals who stop being angry." Back in the barn, Beck pulled his thin blanket over his shoulders and lay down beside the hay, his hand resting near the metal bars of the pen. Thornrake lowered his head until his breath stirred the boy's tangled hair. Somewhere deep in his chest, a quiet promise formed. Beck didn't know why Thornrake was locked up or who claimed he was dangerous. All he knew was that the bull wasn't angry. He was grieving. But no one would believe a homeless kid who smelled like hay and mud. So Beck made a plan to prove Thornrake's heartache to the town. What he didn't know was that others had darker plans in motion, and Thornrake's past was tangled with more than just grief. It was built on betrayal. Beck crouched behind the supply shed, the scent of diesel and molasses thick in the air as two ranch hands passed by, their voices low but sharp.
"Caro should have kept the bull locked up after what happened," said the first, shaking rain off his jacket. "Wouldn't have mattered," the other replied. "A storm like that, you can't blame the animal. But losing a son, that changes a man." Their boots squished through the mud as they disappeared around the corner. Beck waited until their voices faded, then slipped out and pressed himself flat against the barn wall. His heart was pounding. He'd heard the name Caro before, once in a half-mumbled sentence from Merle, and now again in whispers tied to Thornrake. Something in his gut told him this was the thread he needed to pull. Over the past week, Beck had made himself a ghost. He wandered the fairgrounds during the day, acting like he belonged, sometimes pretending to sweep, sometimes helping stack crates, anything to get close enough to hear what others ignored. At night, he returned to Thornrake's pen, whispering updates as if the bull could understand him. He started piecing the truth together from scraps: a bill of sale left on a clipboard, a shipping tag with a name crossed out, a photograph half crumpled in a trash bin. The story came into focus slowly, like fog lifting off a field at dawn. Thornrake hadn't always lived behind steel bars. He'd once roamed the green pastures of Iron Hook Ranch under the care of Lyle Caro, a name known across 3 counties. Caro was strict, proud, and known for raising show bulls worth more than some houses. Thornrake had been his prize, the crown jewel of Iron Hook. But then came the storm. The story Beck heard was fragmented, carried on the backs of broken sentences, but the ending was always the same. Caro's youngest son, Nate, had been trampled to death in the bull's pen. But one detail never sat right. "Boy slipped under the fence," Merle had muttered one night, polishing a tack hammer. Storm blew through, gate flung open, That bull stood over the body like he didn't want to leave it. That image burned in Beck's mind. A beast standing guard, not a monster running wild. So why had Caro sent Thornrake away? The answer came from the shadows. Beck followed Grellman. The man moved like a wolf, slick and alert. Always in black, always with his men. 2 bulky guards with buzz cuts and matching boots. On the 3rd night, Beck kept close behind as Grellman left the exhibition tent and walked toward the livestock trailers on the far edge of the grounds. Thunder rumbled as Beck ducked behind a water tank and watched Grellman open the rear door of a rusted truck. Inside, several bulls stood crowded together, their backs scarred and eyes dull. One had a shattered horn, another limped badly. "They'll fetch good bets this weekend," Grellman said to the driver, his voice flat. "Make sure the crowd sees blood." Beck froze. These weren't fair animals. They were pit fighters, baited and broken for entertainment. And Thornrake was next. That night, Beck couldn't sleep. The truth was too heavy. He sat beside Thornrake's pen, staring at the bull's broad frame. He remembered Merle's words. "He used to talk to Thornrake the same way you do." He, meaning Nate, the boy who was supposedly dead. Beck's fingers tightened around the photo he'd pulled from a garbage bin behind the fair office. A faded picture of a boy with sandy hair and a wide smile standing beside Thornrake, one hand resting fearlessly between the bull's horns. And then Beck found the report. He was rummaging through the trash behind the veterinary tent when he saw it, burned at the edges but not fully destroyed. A medical note, stamped and signed, with a line scratched out in thick ink. Beck tilted the paper toward the moonlight and read what was left. Subject positioned itself protectively between falling debris and minor, lacerations consistent with shielding behavior. The name scratched out was clear under the smudge. Nate Caro. Beck stared at it for minutes. The bull hadn't attacked. He'd protected. But someone had buried the truth. Maybe out of guilt, maybe to get rid of a reminder. Either way, Thornrake had paid the price. He showed the report to Merle the next evening. The old janitor's hands trembled as he held the half-burned paper under the glow of a utility lamp.
"Where'd you find this?" he asked, voice tight. "Dumpster behind the vet station." Merle's face twisted with something between grief and anger. "That ain't right. That's not what they told people." "I know," Beck said. "That's why we have to show them." Merle stared at the boy for a long time. Then he let out a slow breath and nodded. "He used to talk to Thornrake the same way you do," he said softly, eyes glinting with memory. "That boy, he wasn't afraid of anything." "What was he like?" Beck asked. Merle's mouth twitched. "Gentle. Always carried apples in his coat. Would have given you one." From that night on, they worked together. In the quiet hours between closing and dawn, Beck began training Thornrake, not with ropes or commands, but with signs. He tapped once on the bar, and the bull would step forward. He hummed the old lullaby, and Thornrake lowered his head. He whispered soft phrases, teaching the bull to move slowly, calmly, to respond with trust. "We've got one shot," Beck said, drawing a map in chalk on the barn floor. "Founders' Day Parade. The whole town will be there. If we get him to the square and show them this—" He tapped the report. "They'll believe it." Merle looked skeptical. "And what if Grellman catches us first? Then we lose everything." The plan was reckless, bold, and borderline impossible. But Beck had seen what silence cost, and Thornrake had already been locked up too long. They mapped the route, through the back tunnel near the feed silos, past the maintenance gate, across the dry creek bed that led straight to Carson Road. From there, it was a straight path into the town square. They prepared for days, but as they trained in secret, another plan was unfolding behind locked doors. Grellman had heard whispers of someone snooping, of files missing, of Thornrake acting strange. He didn't like loose ends. One night, he slammed the back of his clipboard down on his desk and barked into a phone. "I don't care if it's a kid. I want him gone, quietly." He paced the room, eyes twitching toward the surveillance monitor. "I've ordered the prods, high voltage, triple range. If that bull even flinches wrong during the showcase, we light him up." He paused, then added, "And tell the announcer to call it a mercy shot." Outside the office, one of his guards leaned against the wall, hearing everything. Inside the barn, Beck continued practicing. He didn't know what waited ahead, but he knew what he believed. "We've got 3 days," he whispered into the quiet. 3 days to show them what you really are." Thornrake lowered his head and rested it gently against the bars. And beyond the fairground gates, the shipment truck carrying the cattle prods crossed the county line. Beck knew it was reckless, but he believed if people saw the truth with their own eyes, they'd believe it. What he didn't know was that Grellman had caught wind of someone snooping and had already ordered a shipment of high-voltage cattle prods for the final showcase. The morning of the Founders' Day parade arrived draped in a heavy fog that clung to every rooftop and telephone wire in the town. The air felt weighted, tense, as though it held its breath for what was coming. Beck stood in the dim light just beyond the fairground's edge, his breath clouding in front of him. He wore a stolen ranch hand uniform, dusty jeans, a faded button-down, and a brown cap pulled low over his eyes. Slung beneath one arm was a binder packed with everything he and Merle had collected: veterinary reports, photos of Thornrake's injuries, a full copy of the incident file Merle had painstakingly reassembled from the burnt scraps Beck had found. Beck flexed his fingers as they trembled slightly. It wasn't the cold. It was the weight of the moment pressing against his chest. This was it. No more whispers, no more waiting. If the town was going to know the truth, it had to be today. In the pale pre-dawn, Merle approached the pen with a key that rattled in his hand. His expression was tight, jaw clenched as he fit the key into the lock. It clicked open with a soft clack that seemed to echo in the still air. Inside the pen, Thornrake stirred. The bull stepped forward slowly, heavy hooves pressing into the dirt, eyes fixed on Beck with calm recognition. "You sure about this?" Merle asked, voice low. Beck nodded once. "It's the only way." Merle gave a short breath, half a sigh and half a prayer, then swung the gate wide. Thornrake didn't bolt. He moved forward with quiet certainty, lowering his massive head as he passed Merle. The old man rested a hand briefly on the bull's side, fingers curling into the thick fur, before pulling away. They guided him carefully to the hidden tunnel beneath the feed silos, a narrow concrete path once used for utility transport. It was dark, damp, and tight, but Thornrake followed Beck without hesitation. The bull's hooves clanged against the steel grates, his breath huffing softly. Outside, the sky was beginning to lighten, and the first fireworks sounded faintly in the distance. When they emerged into the field near Carson Road, the starting point of the parade, fog still blanketed the town like a secret waiting to be revealed. The sound of music floated in from blocks away. Trumpets, drums, laughter. Floats lined up in order, each one decorated in red, white, and blue. Marching bands tuned their instruments, and families gathered along sidewalks with folding chairs and flags. No one noticed Beck at first as he stood beside Thornrake, heart pounding, gripping the binder tightly. "Stay close," he whispered to the bull. And Thornrake did. The parade began slowly. Colorful floats rolled past, children waved, costumed performers danced in step with choreographed routines. A marching band rounded the corner. Then came a sudden break in the procession, a space between floats that wasn't supposed to be there. Into that space, Beck stepped forward, leading Thornrake down Main Street. It took a second for the crowd to register what they were seeing. First came gasps, then startled cries. Phones lifted into the air, recording. Children stared wide-eyed. A bull, massive, scarred, unmistakable, was walking calmly down the center of the street, led by a teenage boy with a binder raised high in one hand. Grellman saw it from the VIP platform perched above the square. His sunglasses slid down his nose as his face drained of color. "Stop him!" he barked into his radio. "Now!" Security officers began pushing through the crowd. Panic spread in waves. But Beck didn't run. He didn't flinch. "This bull never hurt that boy," he shouted, voice cracking but strong. "He tried to save him. You lied." The crowd went silent. The music halted mid-note. Even the distant fireworks paused. Thornrake stood beside him, unmoving. The bull's wide eyes scanned the crowd without fear. His hide was marked with long, rough scars. One of his ears was missing a tag. His flank bore a faded brand, one that matched a deleted registry Beck had uncovered with Merle's help. Someone in the crowd murmured, "That's the Iron Hook Bull." A man whispered, "He's the one they said went wild." Grellman shoved past two guards and leapt from the platform, a high-voltage prod clutched in one hand. Beck turned, saw him coming, and instinctively stepped backward. But Thornrake moved first. He shifted his weight with stunning calmness, placing himself directly between Beck and Grellman. The prod sparked as Grellman raised it, but Thornrake didn't flinch. He simply lowered his head, horns angled downward, body still and unthreatening. He wasn't charging. He was shielding. Again, a wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. Someone began clapping, then another. Within moments, the square filled with a strange mix of awe and realization. The bull was not the monster they'd been told about. Suddenly, a uniformed sheriff's deputy broke through the line and grabbed Beck roughly by the collar. "You're trespassing, boy!" he shouted. Beck struggled, nearly dropping the binder. "Let me go! Just look at the report, please!" The binder hit the ground with a thud, pages spilling. But before the officer could drag Beck away, Merle stepped out from the crowd. His boots thudded heavily on the pavement as he pushed through, bent to scoop up the binder, and shoved it directly into the hands of the man standing beside the deputy, the mayor of the town. "Read it," Merle said, voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Everything's in there, all of it. You want to know what happened to that boy? You want to know what this bull really did? It's in those pages." The mayor stared at Merle, then at Beck, then at Thornrake. Slowly, he began to leaf through the binder, page by page. And then, from the crowd, a single voice rang out. "I'm Nate Caro. That bull didn't kill me. He saved me." The square fell silent. All heads turned. A young man in his early 20s stepped forward from the crowd. His clothes were plain, his hair long and uncombed, eyes shadowed by years on the road. But his voice was clear, unwavering. "Nate?" someone whispered. Beck froze. The boy who was supposed to be dead wasn't. Nate's gaze swept over the crowd, then fell on Thornrake. His face broke, not into a smile, but something softer. Recognition, sorrow, relief. "I was there the night of the storm," he said, stepping closer. "I climbed into the pen during the thunder. I shouldn't have. The gate slammed shut behind me. The barn roof came down. Thornrake, he didn't attack. He stood over me, kept me from getting crushed. I passed out. When I woke up in the hospital, they said I'd been lucky. But my father didn't believe me. He said the bull turned wild. He didn't even listen." Nate's voice shook, but he pressed on. "I ran away. I couldn't stay and watch them blame him. But last week I saw his name online. Someone posted pictures. Said he'd be in the Founders' Day showcase. I knew I had to come back." The deputy still held Beck by the collar, but now his grip slackened. The mayor closed the binder slowly. Then he looked at Beck, then at Merle, then back at Thornrake, who had not moved an inch since standing between the boy and the prod. Grellman turned, trying to slink back toward the edge of the crowd, but two ranchers had seen the brands on the animals in his trailer earlier that morning. They stepped forward, grabbed his arms, and tackled him to the pavement as the crowd erupted in stunned noise. Thornrake stood tall, unmoving, his hide catching the morning light. The mayor looked around, nodding slowly, and raised one hand for silence. "Let the bull stay," he said. "He's earned it." The gates of Iron Hook Ranch swung open beneath a late summer sky, not with the creak of age or neglect, but with the smooth purpose of something reborn. The old wooden sign above the entrance still bore its historic brand, but now it included a second carving beneath it, "Sanctuary for the Forgotten." A new chapter had begun. Thornrake stood in the wide paddock closest to the entrance, a large shaded pasture surrounded by thick cedar fencing. Visitors could only approach during specific hours, always from a safe distance. But that day was different. The gates were closed to the public, and the field was quiet, save for the sound of cicadas humming in the brush. Beck leaned against the fence, fingers curled loosely around the top rail. His foster caseworker, a calm-voiced man named Harris, had offered to bring him somewhere else to cool off after the chaos of the past month, but Beck had refused. "I'm not going anywhere unless he knows where I am," Beck had said simply, motioning to the paddock. Now, watching Thornrake graze quietly, Beck let his shoulders relax for the first time in days. The bull still bore the marks of his past, faint scars along his ribcage, the branded number on his flank, and the slight tilt in his left horn, but none of it seemed to weigh him down anymore. Merle approached from the barn, clipboard in hand, a small smudge of dirt on his forehead. "He's eating better," the old man said, resting his arms on the fence beside Beck. "Even started lying down in the grass without flinching." Beck smiled faintly. "He trusts it now." Merle nodded slowly. "And he trusts you." A silence stretched between them, filled only by the sound of wind brushing through the trees. "He used to cry at night," Beck murmured. "When I stayed near the pen, he'd blink real slow, like he remembered something. Then a tear would fall." Merle's voice softened. "Grief takes its own path, even for a creature like him." Beck didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his backpack and pulled out a laminated copy of the binder's front page, the one he had lifted above his head that day on Main Street. It was creased and slightly faded now from being handled so often. He stared at the heading. Subject 942. A. Thornrake. Injuries inconsistent with aggression. It wasn't just a report. It had become proof, not only of innocence but of a shared story that had nearly been buried. "He saved me," Beck whispered, almost too softly for Merle to hear. "Not just that day. From everything." The news had spread quickly after the parade. Videos of Beck walking the bull had gone viral online, and reporters had descended on the town like bees. But Beck had refused most interviews. He had no interest in being famous. "I didn't save the bull," he'd say when asked. "He saved me." When Nate Caro returned to Ironhook with his father, the reunion had been tense but real. The old man, tired and stiff with guilt, had finally looked his son in the eye. "I was wrong," he'd said hoarsely. "I was scared, and I took it out on him." Nate, older now and shaped by his years of drifting, hadn't responded with anger. Instead, he'd proposed something new, turning the ranch into a safe haven for animals like Thornrake, those labeled dangerous or broken, but only because no one had listened to their stories. That idea became reality in weeks. The ranch was cleaned up. The pits Grellman had dug in the far fields were filled and covered. The rusty chains, the damaged pens, the cages, they were removed, dismantled, and burned. As for Grellman himself, he was awaiting trial. Investigators had uncovered multiple ledgers hidden in false compartments of his trailer, each filled with names, weights, dates, and fight outcomes. It was enough for charges of animal cruelty, racketeering, and tampering with government documents. "Justice moves slow," Nate had told Beck once, standing beside the courthouse steps. "But it moves." Beck now lived in a small cabin on the edge of the sanctuary. He didn't need much, just space, quiet, and time. Harris visited often, always making sure schoolwork stayed on track and meals were regular. But Beck had found something more important than routine: purpose. He worked alongside Merle, learning to handle animals with patience and care. He spent hours studying behavior, medical needs, and legal codes. His afternoons were filled with shoveling hay, applying salve to wounds, and gently earning trust from creatures who flinched at kindness. People started to notice. A local teacher asked Beck to speak at the middle school. A boy who'd been invisible was now quoted in essays, newspapers, even a few online documentaries. But he never forgot the truth of how it all began. Each week, he visited the town museum where a small glass case stood in the center of the civic history room. Inside it, preserved in protective plastic, was the original binder. Beside it hung a brass plaque, engraved with a sentence that made Beck stop every time he read it. "Heartbreak is not rage, and not every beast needs taming." On the ranch, Thornrake adjusted to his new life slowly but steadily. He was allowed out into the larger pastures during quiet hours, and was often seen standing near the hilltop overlooking the property, watching the horizon like he was still guarding something. Children visited the sanctuary with their parents. Some came to pet goats or feed rescued donkeys. Others stood silently by Thornrake's paddock, unsure of how to feel. But when Beck walked by, hand resting gently on the bull's shoulder, they often relaxed. "This is where he belongs," Beck would say to them. "Not because he's dangerous, but because he's been through too much to explain in words." The days grew longer as summer deepened, and preparations began for the next Founders' Day parade. "I think we should walk again," Merle said one morning as they cleared hay from a stall. "You and him." Beck hesitated. "Do you think people will want that?" Merle looked at him sideways. "They don't get to decide the truth, but they ought to see it." When the parade day arrived again, the streets of Caro's Hollow were packed with even more faces than the year before. There were banners, floats, and vendors, but one part of the parade was silent by design. When Beck stepped onto Main Street, walking slowly beside Thornrake, no one cheered at first. They watched. The bull moved calmly, his coat brushed clean, his horn gently wrapped in fabric for safety. Beck's hand rested on his muzzle, and Thornrake leaned into it just slightly. Then the first cheer rose, then another. Soon the town erupted in applause, not out of fear or shock, but recognition. This wasn't a spectacle, it was a reunion. Somewhere in the back, Nate stood with his father, watching. Merle waved from the edge of the sidewalk. Harris nodded silently, and Thornrake walked, not as a threat, but as a friend. Later that night, the sanctuary quieted. The wind swept gently across the paddocks, and the last of the visitors had gone home. Beck sat near the fence, knees drawn up, watching Thornrake rest beneath the stars. Crickets chirped. An old lullaby drifted faintly from the barn radio Merle had left on, an old country song that no one knew the words to anymore. Thornrake stirred. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional. It explores powerful themes of empathy, misjudgment, and the profound bonds that can form between those who share a common experience of pain. This narrative aims to challenge assumptions, inspire compassion, and highlight the importance of looking beyond the surface to understand what truly lies within.